You ever had someone you'd give everything for turn around and treat you like you're nothing? I mean, really nothing. Like your hard work, your sacrifices, your entire life just don't count? I want to tell you about the moment I realized love without respect is just exploitation, and how I made the hardest choice I've ever faced. It's the kind of decision that changes everything: family, loyalty, even who you are. Stick around because this isn't the story people like to admit out loud, but it's one too many of us know all too well. My name's Rebecca. I'm 35, and I live in a small town in Pennsylvania where everyone knows your business, whether you want them to or not. I own and run an HVAC company I built from the ground up. Nothing fancy to most people, but it's honest, essential work that pays the bills and then some. You'd think your own family would be the first to understand the value of that. But last Thanksgiving, my sister Emily kicked me out of her dinner party in front of all her wealthy college friends. She didn't even flinch when she told me to leave. She just looked embarrassed, like I was some dirty little secret she couldn't hide anymore. I'll never forget standing there, holding a casserole I'd made, my face hot with humiliation, while her new boyfriend and his fancy friends stared in awkward silence. That moment hurt worse than I can explain because I wasn't just her sister. I'd been the one paying for her entire education. All of it. That's the part she wanted to hide. The fact that her old money lifestyle was bankrolled by my blue-collar paycheck. It's funny, isn't it? How people love the benefits of your sacrifice, but can't stand the reminder of where it came from. That night, I walked out without saying another word. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I made it to my car. I sat there shaking, trying to decide if I should cry or scream. Have you ever felt that kind of sting? The kind that hits you in the gut because it comes from the one person you'd never expect? I know I'm not the only one who's had a family member make them feel worthless for doing honest work. If any of this sounds familiar, I'd really love for you to stick around. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself, even when it's messy and complicated. Let's talk about the stuff most people pretend doesn't happen. Because this isn't just a story about being insulted at dinner. It's about family, respect, and learning when enough is enough. And it all started with one humiliating night that forced me to see my sister and myself in a brutally honest light. It's one thing when a stranger judges you for what you do. I can handle that. But when it's your own sister, the girl you practically raised, looking at you like you're beneath her, that's a different kind of heartbreak. We didn't grow up rich. Our parents worked their fingers to the bone to give us everything we needed. Mom was a kindergarten teacher who stayed up late grading papers, and Dad was a mechanic who came home smelling like oil and hard work. We didn't have brand-name clothes or fancy vacations, but we had love. We had respect for honest labor. My parents taught me that there's no shame in working with your hands, in getting a little dirty if it means putting food on the table. I took that lesson to heart, and I was proud of it. So when Emily acted like she was too good for all of it, it felt like she was spitting on our parents' memory. I used to tell myself she was just young, that she didn't know better. When our parents died in a car crash 5 years ago, she was only 14. I was suddenly 30 years old and her legal guardian. I went from big sister to parent overnight. I promised Mom and Dad at their graves that I would make sure she had every opportunity they dreamed of for her. I meant it. I meant every single word. So I worked longer hours, picked up bigger contracts, and poured everything I had into paying for her dream school, Westmore University, a place that costs more per semester than some people make in a year. I did it without complaint. I wanted her to have what I never did. But somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as the sister who sacrificed for her and started seeing me as an embarrassment she had to explain away. It's amazing how money can change people. Not just the people who have it, but the ones who get used to receiving it. I thought I was helping her. Maybe I was just teaching her to take me for granted. That night in the car after she kicked me out, I sat there in the dark trying to figure out where everything went wrong. How did we get from sharing a tiny bedroom as kids to her not even wanting me in the same room as her new friends? I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. All I could think was, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending this is okay. But saying that out loud felt like betrayal. I was the one who made the promise. I was the one who stepped up when no one else could. Was I really about to break my word to our parents, even if she'd broken every unspoken promise between sisters? I was so tangled up in guilt and anger I didn't know which way was up. I didn't decide right away. I didn't storm off and cut her off the next morning. That's not how these things work. The truth is, these decisions sit with you. They simmer. They keep you up at night, going over every memory and trying to justify one more chance. It took me days to admit to myself that what I'd been doing wasn't helping her anymore. It was enabling her. And when I finally accepted that, I realized the next move was mine to make. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting what little was left of our relationship, even if that meant letting her fall on her face for once. I didn't want to do it, but I knew I had to. Have you ever had to make a choice like that? To cut someone off, not because you stopped loving them, but because you loved them too much to keep watching them self-destruct? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story too. I still remember the look on Emily's face that night. Like she'd rather I'd just disappeared. It wasn't even anger. It was disgust. That cut deeper than any insult she could have thrown at me. I was standing in her expensive off-campus apartment that I paid for, holding a dish our mom used to make for Thanksgiving, and she acted like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. I don't think people talk enough about how family can break your heart in ways strangers never could. You expect the world to be hard. But your sister? The one you read bedtime stories to when she was little? The one who used to crawl into your bed when she had nightmares? You don't expect her to look at you like you're less. That's the kind of pain that doesn't just sting. It lingers. And it wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. I felt like she was rejecting everything we came from. Our parents' sacrifices. The life we built after they were gone. It wasn't enough for her to want more for herself. She had to make sure no one ever knew she came from us. That I came from me. Driving home that night, I didn't even turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of my own breathing, trying to steady it. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if I was angry at her or at myself for letting it get this far, for making it so easy for her to forget where she came from. That night was the moment I realized something had to change, that no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't keep pretending we were okay, because we weren't, and pretending wasn't helping anyone. In the days after, I kept replaying everything in my head, every little comment she'd made over the years. Every time she'd introduced me vaguely as in business instead of saying I owned an HVAC company. The way she'd rush me off the phone if her new friends were around. I'd told myself she was just young, just trying to fit in. But at what cost? I think that's what made it worse. I let it happen. I wanted so badly for her to have the life our parents dreamed of that I didn't see the way it was twisting her. How she was learning that it was okay to be ashamed of where you came from as long as you got what you wanted. That success meant hiding your roots. It wasn't just about her insulting me. It was about realizing I'd been part of the problem. Every tuition payment, every rent check, every allowance. It wasn't just support. It was complicity. I was bankrolling the very behavior that broke my heart. That realization made me sick to my stomach. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late one night, bills spread out in front of me. I was exhausted from a 12-hour day on site, dirt under my nails, my company uniform still on. And I just thought, is this really what Mom and Dad would have wanted? Me working myself into the ground so Emily could turn her back on everything they taught us? I knew then that something had to give, and for the first time, I let myself think the unthinkable. What if I just stopped paying? I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were enabling someone you love? Like your help wasn't actually helping them anymore? It's a brutal thing to admit, isn't it? We want so badly to be the person who fixes everything, who holds it all together, especially for family. But sometimes love means saying no, even when it breaks your own heart to do it. That's the part no one talks about. The part where you lie awake at night wondering if you're a monster for pulling the rug out from under them. Even though deep down, you know it's the only thing that might wake them up. That's the crossroads I found myself at after that Thanksgiving. Keep funding the fantasy and lose myself completely? Or draw a line, even if it meant watching her struggle. I knew whichever I chose would change everything between us. Forever. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. It wasn't revenge. It was the hardest choice I've ever made. Because despite everything, I still loved her. I still do. I just couldn't keep paying for her to look down on me. So if you've ever been there, if you've ever had to set a boundary that felt like it would break you, I see you. I get it. And you're not alone. I grew up in a little town in central Pennsylvania. The kind of place with one main street, a diner everyone swore had the best pie, and neighbors who knew your business before you did. My parents weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but they were proud of what they had. They taught me to be the same way. My dad, George, was a mechanic. The kind of guy who'd work on your car for free if you couldn't pay, so long as you promised to help someone else down the line. Mom, Lorraine, taught kindergarten. She was patient enough to get a room of 5-year-olds to sit in a circle and actually listen. She came home exhausted but happy most days. We didn't take big vacations or have designer clothes, but we had each other. Dinner every night at 6 sharp, Mom's chicken pot pie, Dad's terrible jokes, We watched movies on a beat-up couch with a blanket full of holes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. And they never let us forget that there was dignity in working hard. They used to tell me, "Doesn't matter what you do, Becca, so long as you do it right. Be the best at it. Be proud of it." I carried that with me even when I didn't want to, especially when it would have been easier to forget. Because there were times, especially recently, I felt like the only one who remembered those lessons. I wonder if any of you grew up the same way. Not much money, but a whole lot of love. And the understanding that respect isn't given for a title, but for the way you treat people. My parents didn't just tell us those things, they lived them. I watched my dad come home covered in grease, his hands cracked from winter cold because our little garage didn't have great heat. He'd wash up at the sink and then sit down with us, asking about our day like he hadn't just spent 12 hours bent over engines. Mom would grade papers at the kitchen table after dinner, red pen tapping in time with the old radio. She'd help me with math I didn't understand, even though she was bone-tired. She was the kind of person who remembered every kid's birthday in her class and sent them home smiling even if they had nothing else to smile about. They weren't saints. They argued sometimes about bills or whether Dad was taking too many favors for free, but they always worked it out. And when someone in town needed help, a busted water heater, a kid who needed school supplies, they showed up. No fanfare, just quiet, steady help. Those values weren't negotiable in our house. You didn't lie, you didn't cheat, and you didn't look down on anyone for doing honest work. Ever. I didn't realize how rare that mindset was until I was older, until I watched my own sister forget it entirely. It's funny how the world can convince you that those old lessons don't matter anymore. That if you're not wealthy, you're nothing. But my parents never bought into that, and I didn't think I did either, until Emily started acting like she was too good for where she came from. Emily was different from the start. I was the one who took things apart just to see if I could put them back together. She was the one who read 3 books at once and remembered every detail. Teachers loved her. She won spelling bees and science fairs. I scraped by with solid C's and a knack for fixing anything mechanical. Mom used to say Emily had her head in the clouds, but in the best way. She dreamed big, wanted to travel, work for an international company, make something of herself. I admired that about her. I really did. Even if she had a habit of rolling her eyes when I talked about vocational school. We used to share a room. I'd help her build dioramas for school while she quizzed me on history dates I could never remember. She'd laugh when I got it wrong, but always made sure I passed. Back then, she didn't see me as less. I was her big sister, her protector, the one who'd make her a grilled cheese in the middle of the night if she was crying about a boy. But as we got older, the gap widened. She got accepted to the best private high school in our area on a partial scholarship. Suddenly, she had new friends whose parents were doctors and lawyers. She started saying things like, "I just don't want to be stuck here forever." And I knew what she meant even if she didn't say it outright. I didn't blame her for wanting more, but I never thought she'd end up being ashamed of where she came from, of who she came from. And that's what broke my heart the most. 5 years ago, everything changed in an instant. It was a rainy October evening. They'd gone out for their anniversary dinner, nothing fancy, just the local Italian place they loved. I remember the call so vividly it still makes my stomach turn. A local sheriff on the other end saying there'd been an accident. They didn't make it. That's all I could process at first. One minute, I was planning on dropping by the next day with fresh muffins Mom liked. The next, I was standing in the hospital hallway, signing paperwork with shaking hands. I was 30. Emily was 14. And suddenly, I wasn't just her sister anymore. I was her guardian. I don't know if you've ever lost someone like that. So fast it feels like your world turned upside down in a single breath. The funeral was a blur of casseroles, condolences, and the weight of everyone's eyes on me. "You're all she has now," they kept saying, like I didn't already know. The thing is, I didn't hesitate. I promised them, at their graves, literally, that I would take care of her, that she'd never have to worry about anything, that I'd give her every opportunity they would have wanted for her. It felt like the only thing I could do to honor them. But the thing about promises is, they're easy to make when you're standing in a cemetery. Keeping them over the years, when money's tight and emotions run high, that's where it gets complicated. Those first months after they died were the hardest of my life. I had a business to run, just a few HVAC clients at the time, but I also had a grieving teenager who'd lost her whole world. I tried to be everything for her, sister, parent, friend. Some days she wouldn't talk at all. Other days she'd scream at me like it was my fault. I didn't blame her. She was a kid, but I was drowning. I'd work all day in people's crawl spaces and attics, then come home and help her with her homework, cook dinner, try to keep us both from falling apart. I'd go to bed exhausted, only to wake up at 2 a.m. because she was crying in the next room. It was messy. It was real. But somehow, we got through it. I watched her start to heal, little by little. She began smiling again, talking about college, about getting out of our small town and making something of herself. And I meant it when I told her I'd make sure she could. I started saving everything I could, took on bigger contracts, learned commercial systems so I could land more lucrative jobs, lived below my means. While my friends were buying new cars and going on vacations, I was stashing away every spare penny into her college fund, because that's what you do for family. Or at least, that's what I believed. Back then, I never imagined it would become something she'd use against me. When Emily got accepted to Weston College, the kind of place that brags about its $56K a year tuition, I didn't even blink. I told her I'd take care of it. I meant it. I didn't want her worrying about money. I wanted her to feel free to focus on her future. I can still see her face when I told her. She burst into tears, hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. She said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And in that moment, every sacrifice felt worth it. Every late night, every skipped vacation, every busted knuckle on the job, it all felt justified. So I paid. Semester after semester, tuition, housing, meal plan, books, even a generous allowance so she wouldn't have to work. Meanwhile, I kept expanding my HVAC company, hired more techs, landed commercial contracts, kept the cash flow coming in so she'd never have to feel less than any of her new friends. But somewhere along the way, that gratitude faded. The hugs stopped. The calls home got shorter. And when she did talk, there was a new tone in her voice, a kind of casual superiority that made my skin crawl. I told myself it was just college life, that she was under pressure, that she'd come around. But the truth was, I had built a gilded cage for her, and she was perfectly happy to pretend she didn't know who paid for the gold bars. My company didn't just survive, it thrived. I named it Hartfield HVAC Services, after our family's old street, as a reminder of where I came from. I started small, just me and my van, but I refused to stay there. I took every job I could, even the ones no one else wanted. That meant long nights, freezing winter crawl spaces, and summers so hot I'd soak through my uniform twice in one day. But I learned everything: residential systems, commercial contracts, energy-efficient installations. I earned my certifications, grew my team. Within a few years, I had over a dozen employees counting on me for their paychecks. That wasn't just money in my pocket, it was responsibility. It was building something real, something lasting. I remember the first time I signed a 6-figure contract for a big medical center. I felt like crying and laughing at once. My parents would have been proud, not because I was rich, because I was providing a real service people needed, keeping hospitals safe, businesses running, families comfortable in brutal weather. It's not glamorous. I don't wear a suit and tie. Half the time my hands are cracked and stained no matter how much soap I use. But there's dignity in it. Real dignity. The kind that can't be faked with fancy titles or boardrooms. The kind that comes from solving problems people can't solve themselves. And you'd think Emily would see that she'd be proud of me. But the more my business grew, the more she seemed to shrink away from it, like the success only mattered if it looked a certain way. When Emily got into Weston College, she was over the moon. She ran around our little house with the acceptance letter like she'd just won the lottery. In a way, she had. It was her ticket out of our small town, into the world she'd always dreamed about. And I was right there with her, celebrating, crying, telling her how proud I was. She said she couldn't believe it was really happening. I told her not to worry about the money, that I had it covered. I'll never forget the relief in her eyes. She didn't even question it, didn't think twice about how much it would cost me. And honestly, back then I didn't want her to. I wanted to shoulder it all so she could be free. So I wrote the checks. I paid the tuition bills that looked like mortgage payments. I transferred her rent money, her meal plan fees, even extra so she could go out with her friends and not feel left out. I told myself it was what Mom and Dad would have wanted, that I was honoring them by making sure she never felt less than in that fancy school. At first, she'd call me all the time, telling me about her classes, her professors with big reputations, the clubs she was joining. She sent pictures of the campus in the fall, covered in golden leaves. She seemed happy, and that made me happy, even when I was falling asleep over my invoices at 1 a.m. after a double shift. But slowly the calls got shorter, less personal. I'd ask about her classes and she'd say, "Fine." I'd ask about her friends and she'd mention their last names like I was supposed to know them. And the worst part? She stopped asking about me entirely. I should have seen it coming. The first real sign was when I went up for parents' weekend. I'd cleared my schedule for days, closed the shop early, even ironed my nicest blouse twice to make sure I didn't look like just the HVAC lady. When I got there, she barely introduced me to anyone. When people asked what I did, she mumbled that I worked in building services, like I was some nameless maintenance worker in the background. I corrected her once, told them I owned my own company, but she changed the subject so fast it made my head spin. It stung more than I'd like to admit. Afterwards, she texted me, "Can you not go into details about your job? Some people just don't get it." I sat there staring at my phone, fingers hovering over the screen, trying to decide if I should let her have it or just let it go. I chose to let it go, for the sake of peace, for the sake of being the bigger person. But it didn't stop there. She started making little comments when we talked, joking about how she'd never want to end up doing manual labor, or about how her friends' parents had real careers. She'd say it with a laugh, but there was always that edge in her voice, like she was warning me not to embarrass her. And the worst part? I swallowed it, every time. I made excuses for her, told myself she was young, trying to fit in, that it was just a phase. Even as it ate at me, I kept paying. I kept pretending it was okay, because that's what you do for family, right? It didn't stop at the little jabs. Over time, Emily's words got sharper. She started asking me to phrase things differently when I visited. Just say you own a business. She'd text before alumni events or dinner with her friends. No need to get specific about HVAC. Like my job was something dirty she had to hide. I'd grit my teeth and go along with it. Smile and nod when people asked vague questions, and she'd quickly steer the conversation away. I told myself I didn't care, that it didn't matter what a bunch of rich kids thought about me. But let's be real. It hurt. It hurt because it was her who felt that way. Sometimes she'd even lecture me about it. She'd tell me I was too blunt, too blue-collar in the way I spoke. Once she suggested I take some business communication courses to polish up before networking with her classmates' parents. I laughed it off on the phone, but afterwards I sat in my truck, fist clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her exactly how many of those tuition payments I'd had to work 70-hour weeks to cover, how many holidays I'd skipped with friends because I was on call, how many contracts I fought tooth and nail to land so she could have this life she was now so desperate to hide me from. But I didn't. I kept quiet. I kept paying. Because that was the deal I'd made with myself. That no matter how she acted, I'd make sure she had every opportunity, even if it killed me a little every time she acted ashamed of me. Then came the Prescott family. Old money. The kind of people who had estates instead of houses and called vacations holidays like they were royalty. Emily started dating Bradford Prescott in her sophomore year, and it was like watching her slip through my fingers entirely. She talked about them with this breathless awe, their family traditions, their travel plans, the charity galas they attended. Suddenly, her world was filled with private chefs, tailored suits, and people who spoke about six-figure internships like they were birthrights. I tried to be happy for her. I really did. But our calls became even less frequent. When she did answer, she was distracted, always with someone laughing in the background or whispering to her. And when she talked about me, it was always carefully curated. She'd say, "I ran a small business," glossing over what that meant, making sure no one got too curious about her roots. One time she let it slip that Bradford's parents didn't even know she had a sister paying her tuition. They thought she was on merit scholarships. I remember feeling like the ground had dropped out from under me. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was lying about me, about everything I'd done for her. And still, even then, I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd grow out of it, that all I had to do was keep supporting her, and one day she'd realize how lucky she was, how much she owed me. So when she called to invite me to her pre-Thanksgiving dinner, I was surprised. Genuinely. Part of me was relieved, even excited. I thought maybe this was the olive branch I'd been waiting for. Maybe she was finally ready to include me in her new life instead of hiding me away. She sounded so cheerful on the phone. "Bradford and a few of our friends are coming. I want you there. Can you help me cook?" It was the first time in ages she'd actually asked for my help without sounding annoyed. I jumped at it. I rearranged my schedule, made a grocery list, even picked out a nicer outfit than usual. I remember driving there with grocery bags on the seat next to me, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time. I told myself this was the turning point, that she'd finally see I wasn't an embarrassment, that I was her sister, that I was the reason she even had this life to show off. But when I got there, the cracks showed immediately. She checked the parking lot to make sure I hadn't brought my work truck. She told me to hurry inside before anyone saw me. She took one look at my clothes and asked if I'd brought something else to change into, just in case. And even then, I ignored the warning signs, because I wanted so badly to believe this was going to be a good night, that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally be proud to have me there. The day of the dinner, I tried to be the perfect guest. I showed up early with bags of fresh groceries and Mom's old recipe for cranberry sauce scribbled on a card. Emily let me in quickly, glancing over my shoulder like she expected paparazzi to jump out of the bushes. She gave me a tight smile and told me to keep my voice down. Her neighbors might hear. I ignored it. I wanted the night to go well. I unpacked everything, complimented her apartment, even though I was the one paying the rent, and offered to help cook. For a brief moment, it actually felt normal. We were side by side chopping vegetables like we used to, laughing about burnt toast and bad boyfriends. But then my phone rang. It was my office line, and I knew immediately it wasn't social. Jessica, my office manager, sounded panicked. Riverside Medical Center's operating room AC was failing, and they had surgeries scheduled all afternoon. Backup systems weren't keeping up. Without proper temperature control, those procedures couldn't happen. My heart sank. This wasn't a clogged residential unit or a routine call. It was a literal medical emergency. People's lives might depend on that room staying sterile and cool. I told Jessica I'd be there in 30 minutes and hung up. Then I turned to Emily and apologized, telling her I had to go, but I'd be back before the guests arrived. She didn't even try to understand. Her face fell like a child's who'd just been told Christmas was canceled. "You're leaving now? The guests will be here in 3 hours." I promised her I'd be back in time, but she just turned away, shoulders tense, acting like I was ruining everything on purpose. True to my word, I rushed through the call, got the ORAC system stabilized, and practically sprinted back to campus, but I hadn't had time to go home and change. I walked up to her apartment, still in my navy blue Hartfield HVAC jumpsuit. My company's name stitched over my heart, dust and sweat clinging to my collar. When she opened the door and saw me, her eyes went wide with horror. "You couldn't have changed first?" she hissed. I told her I'd come straight back for her, wanting to help her finish in time. But it didn't matter. She looked at me like I was radioactive. She practically shoved me toward her bedroom and told me to change into anything else. I went to the car, dug out my backup outfit, just jeans and a sweater, and changed right there in the front seat like some teenager sneaking home after curfew. I remember staring at myself in the rearview mirror, trying to smooth my hair, my face hot with embarrassment. I wanted to scream or cry or both. When I got back inside, she didn't even look at me. She was busy arranging imported cheeses on a fancy platter. She barely muttered, "It's fine, just help me set up." I swallowed every word I wanted to say, every angry retort because I didn't want to ruin her night. I told myself to be the adult, to be the big sister. So I helped. I set the table, lit the candles, poured the wine. I tried to pretend it didn't feel like I'd been scrubbed out of the picture entirely, reduced to some anonymous caterer instead of the person who'd paid for all of it. When the guests arrived, I felt completely out of place from the moment they walked in. Bradford was first, perfect hair, designer clothes, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gave Emily a kiss on the cheek like they were the stars of some movie about young elites in love. He barely looked at me except to nod politely. Then came Sebastian and Madison, all expensive watches and effortless sneers, and Justin and Amanda, who at least seemed genuinely friendly. They clustered in the living room, laughing about spring break plans in Bali and internships they'd secured through family connections. It was like listening to aliens talk about life on another planet. Emily introduced me as my sister Rebecca, but didn't offer anything else. I waited for her to mention that I owned my own company, that I was the one making her entire lifestyle possible. She didn't. Instead, when someone asked what I did, she jumped in and said I was just visiting for the weekend, changing the subject before anyone could press further. At one point, Amanda asked me directly where I lived, and I said right here in town. She seemed surprised, genuinely interested. "What kind of work do you do?" Before I could answer properly, Emily tensed up beside me, shooting me a look that said, "Don't you dare." But I didn't lie. I said I owned an HVAC company. Sebastian raised an eyebrow and repeated it like it was a punchline. "So you're the person people call when their AC breaks?" He smirked, swirling his wine. Emily didn't say a word to defend me. She just sipped her drink and looked at the floor. And I stood there, wanting to disappear. The rest of the night felt like an exercise in humiliation I had no way to escape. I helped bring out appetizers and drinks like I was staff instead of family, and no one batted an eye. When Amanda tried to ask me more about my company, Emily cut her off. changing the topic to Bradford's father's new yacht. The entire room lit up with interest at that. I watched Emily laugh at Bradford's stories about the Hamptons, saw how she mirrored his gestures, the way she tried to match his polished words. It was like watching my sister put on someone else's skin. She didn't even look like herself anymore, just a cutout from one of those glossy magazines she used to read and mock with me on the couch. I tried to contribute a few times, mentioned how we'd always made Thanksgiving special growing up. Mom's old recipes, Dad's insistence on everyone saying what they were thankful for. Emily practically flinched when I brought it up. She waved a hand dismissively and said, "Oh, just the usual boring stuff," before steering the conversation away. I sat there, cheeks burning, remembering all those holidays when she was little and we'd play tag in the backyard, even when it was freezing. The cranberry sauce she used to eat by the spoonful, laughing when Dad pretended to hate it, and now it was just boring stuff she couldn't wait to bury. No one else really noticed my silence. They were too busy talking about ski trips and family foundations, except Amanda, who kept giving me these small sympathetic glances. I wanted to thank her, but I couldn't get the words out without breaking down in front of everyone. Dinner went on forever. I kept helping in the kitchen, clearing plates, trying to keep my head down. I could hear them laughing in the other room about vacation homes and internships that were basically guaranteed because someone's uncle sat on the board. It was like eavesdropping on a club I could never join. When I finally sat back down, Amanda asked gently, "Don't you two have Thanksgiving traditions?" I felt a surge of hope. I thought Emily would finally open up, maybe tell them something real about us. Instead, she didn't even blink. "Oh, nothing special," she said with that practiced little smile. "Just, small town stuff." I felt like I'd been slapped. I tried to speak up, tried to say that Mom always made sure we cooked together, that Dad loved making everyone say what they were grateful for. But Emily cut me off. "No one wants to hear about that old-fashioned stuff," she snapped, her eyes daring me to keep going. It wasn't even embarrassment anymore. It was contempt. She wanted to erase all of it, the real us. The parents who'd worked themselves to the bone for us. The big sister who'd poured every dollar into her future. I realized in that moment she wasn't just embarrassed about my work. She was embarrassed about me. The table went silent. I watched Bradford's eyes shift, uncomfortable. Sebastian and Madison exchanged glances, and Amanda just looked at me like she was about to cry herself. But Emily? She was already stacking plates, pretending nothing had happened. We finished dinner in near silence, except for Bradford trying to force polite conversation. I felt like a ghost in my own sister's life. When Emily finally sat back down, Bradford asked, maybe trying to fill the gap, "So Rebecca, you didn't go to college?" I swallowed hard, said no. I went to technical school. Sebastian actually choked on his wine laughing. Technical school? Like community college? His voice dripped with amusement. I felt heat rise in my face, but I held my ground. I explained the certification process, the hours of training, the complexity of what I did. I tried to show them it wasn't just fixing things. But Bradford shrugged and said something about education being the best predictor of success. I nearly laughed at that. My business cleared 7 figures in revenue last year. I mentioned it, not to brag, but to shut them up. Sebastian practically spit out his drink. "From fixing air conditioners?" he snorted. Emily didn't defend me, didn't even look at me. Finally, she snapped, "Can you just stop? You're embarrassing me." She was crying now, voice rising. "You're just an AC tech. Stop acting like it's some prestigious career. You crawl around in people's attics. Do you know how that sounds to people like Bradford?" I sat there frozen, napkin in my lap, trying not to show how bad it hurt. The silence was deafening. Amanda whispered, "That was uncalled for, Emily." But Emily didn't hear her. She was too busy glaring at me like I'd ruined her entire life just by existing. I don't remember standing up. One second I was sitting there with her words still ringing in my ears. Just an AC tech. And the next, I was carefully placing my napkin on the table like I was in some polite nightmare. My legs felt numb. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. My throat was tight with all the words I wanted to scream, but refused to let out in front of those strangers. I managed to keep my voice steady when I said, "I'm sorry for embarrassing you with my honest work. Enjoy your dinner." I don't know how I kept from crying. Maybe it was sheer stubbornness. Maybe it was shock. I turned and walked out without looking back. I remember the hush that fell over the room. Bradford's awkward cough, Amanda's whispered, "That was so uncalled for." But I didn't turn around. Outside, the cold November air hit me like a slap. I sucked in a breath so sharp it felt like my lungs would burst. I fumbled for my car keys with shaking hands. I felt like I was going to throw up. The casserole I'd spent all day preparing was still in her oven, Probably burnt by then, but it didn't matter. Nothing did. I just needed to get out of there before I fell apart. As I drove away, tears streamed down my face. The streetlights blurred into streaks of white and gold. I was too angry to see clearly, too hurt to even yell. I remember hitting the steering wheel with my fist at a stoplight, choking back sobs, asking myself how the hell we'd gotten here. How did my baby sister become someone who could look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't good enough? When I got home, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat in my car in the driveway, head resting on the steering wheel, shaking with silent, miserable laughter. This was Thanksgiving. This was family. And mine had just told me I was nothing. I finally stumbled inside and collapsed onto the couch without even taking off my coat. My whole body felt heavy, like grief had turned my bones to lead. I tried to breathe deeply, but it just came out in these ragged gasps. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with Emily's name. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was there left to say? I let it ring and ring until it stopped, the silence even louder than her accusations had been. I thought about our parents, about how proud they'd been of both of us, how hard they'd worked so we could have choices. Mom always said we had to take care of each other. That's what family was. But this didn't feel like family. It felt like betrayal written in neon. Eventually, I gave up trying to be strong. I buried my face in the pillow and sobbed until I couldn't see straight. My chest hurt. My throat was raw. I remember thinking I'd never felt this alone in my entire life. Not even the day our parents died. At least then, I'd had Emily. She'd clung to me like a lifeline. We'd been all each other had. But now, she didn't want me. Didn't even see me as worth inviting to her table unless I stayed quiet and lied about who I was. All those years I'd spent killing myself to give her opportunities, paying for everything she needed, even things she just wanted, and it all boiled down to this. I wasn't good enough to be seen with her friends. I stayed on the couch until well past midnight, replaying every moment in that apartment like a horror film. Every fake smile, every forced laugh, every time she cut me off or steered the conversation away from who I really was. And the words echoed in my head on repeat. You're just an AC tech. The next morning, my eyes were so swollen I could barely see. I called in late to my own company, told my crew chief to handle the first appointment. Then I called Lisa. She's been my best friend since high school, the one person who's always had my back, no matter how messy things got. When she heard my voice crack, she didn't ask questions, just said, I'm on my way. She showed up 20 minutes later with a giant thermos of coffee and a look that could kill. I barely got through telling her what happened before she threw her hands in the air and swore so loudly I was glad my windows were closed. She what? Rebecca, that's not just rude, that's cruel. You paid for her entire life and she treats you like dirt? Hearing someone else say it made it feel even more real. I broke down all over again, tears soaking the blanket she wrapped around my shoulders. Lisa didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me to calm down. She just sat there and let me rant, let me be angry, let me be hurt. She reminded me that I deserved better than the way Emily had treated me. Later that evening, Alex came by. My boyfriend of 3 years, construction project manager, the kind of man who appreciates calloused hands and dirty boots. He didn't say much at first, just pulled me into the tightest hug, pressing his chin against my hair. When I finished telling him everything, he shook his head slowly. You know you can't keep paying her tuition, right? He asked gently. I stared at him, eyes puffy, voice cracking when I said, but I promised my parents. He sighed and kissed my forehead. Your parents wouldn't want you humiliated like this. They'd want her to respect you, and herself. Sometimes love means letting people face consequences. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but deep down I knew he was right. That night, after Alex went home, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, every word Emily had thrown at me replaying in my head like a broken record. Around 2 a.m., I got up, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I started pulling up every bank transfer, every tuition payment, every rent check I'd sent her over the last year and a half. It was like digging up my own grave, line by line. I saw the thousands in tuition every semester, the extra money for books, the housing deposits, the monthly allowances so she could go out with her friends and never feel left out. I tallied it all while my hands trembled on the keyboard. The final number made my breath catch in my throat. Over $120,000. And that didn't even count the stuff you can't put a price on. The weekends I worked overtime instead of going out with Alex. The nights I came home too tired to even eat dinner. The dreams I put on hold. The bigger house I never bought. The vacation I kept promising myself next year. I gave it all to her without a second thought. I sat there, staring at the spreadsheet, my eyes blurry with tears. For what? So she could sit at a table with people who laughed at my work? So she could lie about where she came from and act ashamed of the person who'd made it all possible? My stomach twisted so hard I felt like I might be sick. It hit me all at once. I wasn't helping her anymore. I was enabling her, teaching her that love meant no boundaries, no respect, that she could take and take and take without ever having to see the person she was taking from. And it was my fault, too. I'd let it get this far. By sunrise, I was drained, as my coffee had gone cold hours before, but I hadn't even noticed. I looked around my little kitchen, the scuffed linoleum floor, the old wooden cabinets I'd fixed 100 times, the photo of Mom and Dad on the fridge smiling with pride. I pressed my forehead to the table and let out a choked sob. I felt like I was betraying them. I'd promised to take care of Emily. But what did that promise really mean? Did it mean funding a lifestyle that made her think she was better than us? Did it mean letting her become someone who could humiliate me in front of a room full of strangers without even blinking? I didn't think that's what Mom and Dad had in mind. They'd taught us respect, dignity, the value of hard work, the importance of family. And somewhere along the way, those values had gotten lost, buried under tuition bills and designer clothes and fancy dinner parties. I'd thought I was helping her build a better future, but maybe I was just buying her contempt. I closed my laptop with shaking hands and sat there in silence for a long time. I felt hollow, guilty, angry, but under all of that, there was this cold, clear certainty I couldn't shake. If I kept paying for her to live like this, nothing would ever change. She'd never have to look at herself honestly. She'd never have to see what she'd become. So I made the decision. I wasn't going to pay her tuition anymore. Not this semester. Not any semester. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about finally setting a boundary I should have set years ago, even if it broke both of us in the process. I didn't call her right away. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to make sure I wouldn't scream or sob or beg. But a few days later, I got the email from her university, a polite reminder that her spring tuition payment was coming due. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it without replying. My heart was pounding, but my mind was made up. It wasn't long before she noticed. My phone rang while I was at the office reviewing a new commercial contract. Jessica buzzed my desk. "Your sister's on the line. She sounds upset." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and picked up. "Hello?" Her voice hit me like a slap. Furious. Panicked. "Rebecca, what the hell? I just got an email saying my tuition hasn't been paid. What's going on?" I swallowed hard. My voice felt like sandpaper. "I'm not paying it this semester," I said as evenly as I could. The silence on the other end stretched painfully. Then she exploded. "You can't do that. You've always paid it. What am I supposed to do? I'll get dropped from my classes." I closed my eyes, let the words hit me like hail. "You have options," I told her quietly. "Financial aid, student loans, part-time work, transfer to a less expensive school. You're not the only one who's ever had to figure it out." She went quiet for a second, then scoffed. "Are you kidding me? You're ruining my entire life over one stupid dinner? Because I embarrassed you?" I felt my jaw tighten. "It wasn't just one dinner, Emily. It was everything. The way you talk about our family. The way you talk about me. You don't respect me, or what I do. I'm not going to keep funding that. I won't pay for you to treat me like I'm beneath you." Her breathing was ragged. She tried to argue, but I ended it. "This conversation is over." Then I hung up, my hand trembling on the receiver, feeling like my heart had cracked in half. The fallout started immediately. My phone lit up with text after text, each one more frantic and accusatory than the last. "You're ruining my life. How can you do this to me after everything? You're so selfish." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew anything I said would just feed the fire. She switched tactics, too. After the rage came the guilt trips. "You promised Mom and Dad you'd take care of me. They'd be so disappointed in you." That one nearly broke me. I remember putting the phone down and walking out onto my porch, breathing in the cold winter air like it could steady me. It didn't. It just made my eyes sting harder. I wanted to give in. God, I wanted to. I wanted to call her and say, okay, I'll pay it, just don't hate me." But every time that instinct hit me, I heard Alex's voice in my head. "Sometimes love means letting them face consequences. And Lisa's, too. She's treating you like an ATM, not a sister." It was the hardest thing I've ever done to hold that line. At night, I'd lie awake wondering if I was ruining her future. I knew what college meant to her. I knew she'd worked hard in her classes, despite everything else. But then I'd think about the dinner party. The way she'd said, "You're just an AC tech," like it was filth on her tongue. The way she'd hidden everything I'd done for her like a dirty secret. And I realized I wasn't taking her future away. I was giving her a chance to claim it for herself, even if she couldn't see it that way. Even if she hated me for it forever. I didn't want to be her crutch anymore. I wanted her to stand. It wasn't just Emily who turned up the heat. A few days later, I got a call from Margaret and Bill, old friends of our parents who had always been kind to us growing up. Margaret's voice was soft, careful. "Rebecca, I heard you and Emily had a falling out. She's really upset. She says you're refusing to pay her tuition." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. "That's true. She'll need to figure it out herself." There was a pause. I could almost hear the discomfort buzzing on the line. "I understand you're hurt, but she's so young. She's just figuring things out. Your parents would want you to support her education." That one landed like a punch. I closed my eyes and pictured Mom and Dad's faces. What would they say if they saw us now? I swallowed hard. My parents would want her to respect people who help her. They wouldn't want me to bankroll her treating me like trash. My voice cracked on the last word. Then Bill got on the phone. Less gentle, more direct. "Rebecca, whatever argument you had, using her education as leverage isn't right. She's your responsibility." I felt anger flare so hot I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from yelling. "She's 19, Bill, an adult. I'm done paying for her to look down on me." The call ended awkwardly, with platitudes about family and forgiveness. But I could tell they thought I was being cruel. I sat there in my kitchen after, feeling like the worst sister alive, but also strangely certain I was finally doing the right thing. The hardest part was explaining it to myself. Every instinct I had screamed at me to cave in. I'd see her baby photos on my fridge, the two of us at the county fair, her piggyback on my shoulders sticky with cotton candy. I'd remember braiding her hair for the first day of middle school, picking her up crying from high school after her first heartbreak. But I kept coming back to that night at the dinner party. The way she cut me off. The way her voice cracked with anger when she said, "You're just an AC tech." The way she pretended our parents' traditions were nothing. I thought about all the values they'd given us. The ones I'd kept alive every day on job sites and service calls. Respect, integrity, hard work. Treating people like they matter, no matter what they do for a living. That was the legacy I was trying to pass on. But I couldn't do it if I kept paying her to forget it. I realized then that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was fear. And I was done being afraid of losing her if it meant losing myself. So I practiced what I'd say if she called again. I'd tell her, "I love you, but this is the line. You have to figure this out on your own." I knew she'd hate it. I knew she might never forgive me, but that was the price I was willing to pay. Because someone had to stop enabling her, and apparently that someone was me. In quiet moments, I'd talk to my parents in my head. I'd whisper, "I hope you'd understand. I hope you'd be proud." And deep down, even though it hurt like hell, I believed they would be. They'd taught me to stand up for what mattered, even when it meant standing alone. A week later, Emily showed up unannounced at my house. I heard the knock and my stomach twisted. I wasn't sure if she was there to scream at me or beg. When I opened the door, she looked awful. Eyes red, hair in a messy ponytail, designer coat wrinkled. She pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, dropping her bag on the floor with a thud. "I talked to Bradford," she said immediately, voice sharp, like it hurt her throat to get the words out. "He broke up with me." She was shaking. "He said he couldn't be with someone who couldn't afford to stay at Weston, that his parents wouldn't understand." She spat the words out, half furious, half broken. I just stood there, stunned, watching the cracks in her perfect facade. I tried to comfort her. I really did. But she recoiled when I touched her arm. "Don't!" she snapped. "This is your fault. If you hadn't cut me off, none of this would have happened." My heart clenched so tight I thought it would split open. I felt my jaw tighten, every part of me wanting to scream back, but I forced myself to stay calm. She sat on my couch with tears streaming down her face, demanding I fix it. Demanding I pay the tuition so she could go back, so Bradford would take her back. She didn't even try to apologize. She didn't say she was sorry for the dinner, for the words she'd thrown at me like knives. It was all conditional, all transactional. "If you pay, I'll be nicer. I'll say I'm sorry." And in that moment, the little sister I'd raised felt like a stranger. I saw it so clearly. She didn't understand at all. She didn't see the problem. She just wanted the money back so her life wouldn't change. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt cold clarity. I shook my head and whispered, "No." She screamed at me then, loud, raw, ugly. She called me selfish, cruel. She threw every accusation she could think of, that I wanted her to suffer, that I was jealous, that I was trying to control her. I let her get it all out, arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter to keep myself steady. When she ran out of breath, I spoke carefully, slowly, making sure every word hit the mark. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I love you enough to let you fail. You don't respect me. You don't respect what I do. And you don't respect yourself enough to stand on your own 2 feet. She tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. You've spent the last 2 years acting like you're too good for where you came from. Too good for the people who made sacrifices for you. I won't pay for you to keep living a lie. I won't pay so you can spit in my face and call me just an AC tech. My voice cracked, but I kept going. You want to stay at Weston? Figure it out. Apply for aid. Take loans. Get a job. That's on you now. She sat there glaring, eyes full of tears she wouldn't let fall. She called me heartless, said she hated me. I just nodded slowly. That's your right, I told her. Hate me if you need to. But I'm done funding you until you learn what it means to actually respect where you came from. And me. Silence fell between us. Heavy, unmovable. She grabbed her bag and stormed out without another word. I stood there in the wreckage of that moment, heart hammering, knowing there was no going back. When the door slammed, I sank onto the floor and finally let the sobs come. Ugly, shaking, gasping sobs. It felt like grieving her all over again. Like losing our parents had taught me one kind of pain, and losing my sister while she was still alive was a brand new hell. I pressed my palms to my eyes and cried until I couldn't make a sound anymore. I didn't want this. I never wanted this. I wanted to be the big sister who saved her, who gave her the life our parents dreamed of. I wanted to see her graduate, watch her cross the stage with that diploma. Know I'd kept my promise. But what was the promise worth if it turned her into someone who could look me in the eye and tell me I was worthless? In the quiet of my living room, I looked around at the evidence of my own hard work. My boots by the door, caked with mud. The old couch I'd reupholstered myself. The photo of our parents smiling on the mantel. I remembered what they'd taught us. That your worth isn't your title. It's what you do, who you help, how you treat people. I realized I wasn't betraying them by cutting her off. I was honoring them, honoring everything they stood for by refusing to let her spit on it. Even if she couldn't see that. Even if she never forgave me. That was love too. The ugly kind. The real kind. The kind that doesn't always feel good but is necessary. I got up eventually, wiped my face, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still shaking, but for the first time in years, my heart felt clear. I didn't know what would happen next. If she'd figure it out. If she'd ever come back. But I knew I'd done the right thing. And sometimes that has to be enough. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. Emily didn't call. Didn't text. I'd check my phone constantly. The screen lighting up with work emails, family friends asking if I'd reconsider, but never her name. The silence was brutal. Worse than any screaming match could have been. It was like she'd cut me out completely. I tried to focus on work, on running my crew, scheduling jobs, reviewing invoices. But every time I caught my reflection in a storefront window, I'd see my own haunted eyes staring back. I wondered if I'd gone too far, if I'd just abandoned her, if I'd truly ruined her future over one ugly dinner and a pile of old resentments. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in the dark with only the creak of the house for company. I'd remember her as a kid, sticky with popsicle juice, giggling on our front porch steps. I'd remember her sobbing in my arms at our parents' funeral, swearing she didn't want to lose me too. And now she was gone by choice. Sometimes I'd get so close to picking up the phone, to typing, "I'm sorry, I'll pay it." But I'd stop myself every time, because deep down, I knew the truth. Apologizing for setting a boundary wouldn't fix anything. It would just reset the same toxic pattern. And I couldn't go back to that, no matter how much it hurt. So I waited, and hoped, and doubted myself. But I didn't give in. I held the line, even as it threatened to break me in half. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to make it easy for someone to keep disrespecting you. A couple of weeks later, out of nowhere, I got a short, clipped text. Just 3 words. I got hired. My heart jumped in my chest. I didn't reply right away. I just read it over and over, letting the meaning sink in. She'd gotten a job. She was trying. Maybe for the first time, really trying to stand on her own. Eventually, I typed back. That's good. Proud of you. It felt awkward, formal, like talking to a stranger, but it was the best I could do. She didn't answer immediately. Hours passed. Then she sent back, library assistant, minimum wage. But it's something. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself exhale. I didn't rub it in, didn't say, "I told you so." I just replied, "It's a start." And I meant it. Because that's all I'd ever wanted for her. To start figuring it out for herself. To know what it felt like to earn even a small piece of her future. To see that work, any honest work, has value. We didn't suddenly become best friends again. She didn't beg for forgiveness or gush gratitude. The next few days were silent again. But that tiny crack in her armor, it gave me hope. Hope that maybe she was starting to see the world outside of Bradford Prescott's living room. And in my own quiet way, I started letting go of the anger. Not forgetting it. Not pretending it didn't hurt. But accepting that maybe this was the only way she was ever going to learn. A few weeks later, she called me. Not to beg for tuition, but to talk. Her voice was small, rough, like she'd been crying. She told me she'd moved out of her fancy apartment and into a shared dorm, that she'd picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop on campus, that she'd applied for every scholarship and grant she could find. She didn't sugarcoat it. She sounded exhausted, frustrated. "It's not enough," she said quietly. "Even with everything, I can't afford to stay at Weston next semester." My chest ached at that. The urge to jump in, to fix it, burned like fire under my ribs. But I didn't say yes. I just listened. For the first time, she didn't yell. She didn't blame me. She just admitted she didn't know what to do. I asked her if she'd thought about transferring to state college. She hesitated, then said she'd looked into it. The tuition was lower, the business program solid. "It's not Weston," she said, voice cracking. I told her gently, "It doesn't have to be Weston to be enough." There was a long pause on the line. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she said, "I don't want to hate you." I closed my eyes, tears slipping free. "I don't want you to hate me either," I whispered back. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were talking honestly. We didn't solve everything that night. We didn't make any promises, but it felt like the start of something real, something that wasn't built on money or guilt or lies. And for the first time in months, I went to bed without the weight of regret crushing my chest. Over the next few months, things changed in small but undeniable ways. Emily started texting me more regularly, not asking for money, but just to talk. She'd tell me about her shifts at the coffee shop, about tutoring freshmen for extra cash. She complained about rude customers and laughed when I shared my own nightmare client stories. For the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same level. She told me she was exhausted all the time, that she missed having weekends free, that she hated having to choose between buying new textbooks or groceries. I didn't gloat. I didn't say "I told you so." I just listened, biting my tongue so hard it hurt. Because the last thing she needed was a lecture. She needed someone who believed she could handle it. Then one evening, she called sounding shaky. She'd finally made the decision to transfer to state. "I can't make it work at Weston," she admitted, voice cracking. "It's too expensive, too everything." I told her she was making the right choice, that I was proud of her, that state's program was solid and she'd still get her degree. She cried. I did too. She started looking for roommates, sold off some of the designer clothes she'd insisted on having. She learned to budget for real. It wasn't easy watching her go through it. Sometimes she'd text me angry things late at night, venting about how unfair it was. But she always ended with, "I'll figure it out." And I'd send back, "I know you will." For the first time since our parents died, I felt like I wasn't carrying her on my back. She was walking beside me, stumbling sometimes, sure, but walking on her own 2 feet. And that was all I ever wanted for her. Eventually, she asked if she could come see me. I said yes without hesitation. I remember cleaning my entire house like it was an audition, checking the mirror a dozen times. When she knocked, I opened the door to find her standing there looking so different. No designer bag, no forced smile, just Emily, my sister. She hugged me first. No words, just this fierce, desperate hug that said everything. When she finally let go, she wouldn't meet my eyes at first. She mumbled, "I've been awful to you." I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah," I said honestly. "You have." She winced. Then she nodded too, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry." We sat on the old couch, the same one we'd shared popcorn on as kids, and talked for hours. No shouting, no blame. She told me about Bradford dumping her the second she couldn't afford Weston, about realizing her fancy friends didn't care about her once she wasn't part of their world, about how working minimum wage had taught her more about people than any class. I told her about staying up all night counting tuition payments, about feeling like a failure as a sister and a guardian, about the gut-wrenching choice to cut her off. We cried, we laughed a little. At one point, she said, voice breaking, I didn't know how hard it was for you. And I said, you weren't supposed to, but you do now. It wasn't a perfect fix. It didn't erase everything, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt like we were actually sisters again. Not benefactor and dependent. Just two women trying to figure it out, the way our parents would have wanted. We found a new balance after that. She transferred to state and moved into a cheap apartment with two roommates she actually liked. She picked up a work-study job in the business department. She even offered to help me with bookkeeping for my company in her free time. The first time she said it, I laughed so hard I nearly fell over. But she was serious. She wanted to learn. And honestly, she was good at it. Organized. Smart. She streamlined my billing system and caught an invoicing error that saved me thousands. Sometimes I'd watch her on the phone with a client, professional and warm, and feel this fierce, painful pride in my chest. She was turning into the woman I always knew she could be. We didn't talk much about that dinner party anymore. It hung there between us, unspoken. But sometimes, when we'd have a glass of wine after work, she'd look at me and say, I really was awful, huh? And I'd nod, yeah, but you're better now. And she'd smile, eyes shining, and say, thanks to you. I won't lie and say it was all easy. There were fights, old wounds reopened, but every time we worked through it, because now we were equals. Now she understood what it meant to work for something, to respect it, to respect me. That was worth more than any tuition payment ever could have been. And when Thanksgiving rolled around again, she came to my house with a homemade pie. She sat at my table and toasted, to my sister, who taught me what real success looks like. I didn't cry then. I waited until after she left, and then I let myself feel it all. Relief, pride, love, hope. Because for the first time in a long time, I knew we were going to be okay. Have you ever had to make a choice like that, where you loved someone enough to let them fail so they could finally stand on their own? Maybe it was a sibling, a friend, even your own kid. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, watching someone you care about struggle because you refuse to enable them anymore. But sometimes that's the only way they learn. If this story resonated with you at all, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and share your own experience. What it felt like, what you learned, what you'd tell someone facing the same thing right now. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. That's why we share these stories. To remind each other that even the hardest choices can come from love. And if you want to see more stories like this, real, raw, honest moments about family, growth, and what it means to do the right thing even when it hurts, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps this channel reach more people who might need to hear these words. If you found value in this video and want to help support the channel, there's an option right below this video where you can click Super Thanks. It's a small way to say you appreciate these stories and want to help keep them coming. Even a little bit makes a difference and helps me keep bringing you content that's personal, meaningful, and real. So tell me, have you ever had to let someone go so they could grow? How did it change you? How did it change them? Let's talk about it in the comments. Thanks for being here, and remember, sometimes love means holding the line, even when it would be so much easier to give in. Because real love wants the best for people, even if getting there is messy as hell.